Good afternoon. My name is Amanda Pinkelman, and I'd like to welcome you to the Nebraska State Historical Society's Brown Bag History Lecture Series. The brown bags have been offered since the mid-1980s. With a couple of exceptions some years ago, the brown bag topics for the year have not been thematic. However, in light of Nebraska's 150 celebration of the statehood, the Society is sponsoring brown bags for 2017 related to the theme, Peoples of Nebraska. Lectures are held monthly on the third Thursday in the auditorium at the Nebraska History Museum at 15th and P Street in Lincoln, Nebraska. The programs have a live audience and are broadcasted on public access channels in Lincoln, Omaha, Bellevue, Hastings, North Platte, Grand Island, Papillion, South Sioux City, Blair, Bassett, and Sidney. Oh, I forgot some slides. Okay. And are posted on YouTube. The detailed schedule for this series, as well as information about the Society's programs and services, can be found at the Society's website, which we have a new website. It's history.nebraska.gov. If you're not already a member, I encourage you to enjoy. Benefits of membership include subscriptions to the Nebraska History Magazine and the Society's newsletter, use of microfilm reader printer at the Society's library archives to make free copies from microfilm, free admission to the Society's 7 historic sites, and discounts at Society's landmark stores at the Nebraska History Museum, the Capitol, and Chimney Rock. Reduced fees for children's classes, tours, after-hours events, and similar activities where there are fees. Before I introduce my speaker today, I want to thank the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation for the financial support, which allows us to tape and broadcast programs on public access television across the state and on the Society's YouTube page. To find these videos on YouTube, directions for our live audience are on the handouts. For those viewing on video, the directions are on the screen. It's easy. Type in the browser www.youtube.com/user/Nebraska Historical. Click on the playlist and you will go to a new page. There you will see a list labeled 2017, a subsection to house these special sesquicentennial brown bag series, Peoples of Nebraska. Just below the subsection, you will see a subsection labeled Brown Bag Lectures, where you will find over 150 past brown bags available on YouTube. Our speaker today is John Schleicher. John is a native of Nebraskan who was raised in Plattsmouth. He received his BA in Social Science Education from Hastings College and his MA in History from the University of Nebraska, Omaha. He has worked in public history throughout his career at the Durham Museum in Omaha, the Dodge County Historical Society in Fremont, and the Nebraska State Historical Society. Since 2002, he has been on the faculty for the McGugan Library of Medicine at the UN Medical Center in Omaha and is currently Special Collections Librarian and Associate Professor. Since 2004, he has also been an adjunct instructor at the History Department at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. His research interests include various aspects of Nebraska history, including immigration, as well as Nebraska medical history and the history of other health professions in the state and medical history in general. His topic today is Peopling in the Prairie, 19th Century Immigration of Nebraska. Just to let you know about asking questions, John prefers you ask them at the end. Please join me in welcoming John Schleicher.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm not very techie, so I like paper and books, not technology. So thank you for coming today, everyone. I'm really excited to be here for this because I actually used to organize these brown bag lectures back in the 1990s when I worked for the State Historical Society, or I was going to say back in the last century, right? Back in the last century. And it's really a pleasure to be here for this. I'm sorry that John Strope, who many of you know, who usually introduces these, wasn't able to be here today, but is at a grandchild's graduation, so we'll excuse him for that. Really was pleased when he asked me to come, and it's just a great spot to be in because of all the other people that have given talks here, and especially, standing in the footsteps of historians like John Carter and Jim Potter, who we miss, of course, and Tom Beaker. So it's really wonderful to be here today. So I also have to mention a couple of things, a couple of little commercials, because I originally developed this talk as part of my work as the humanities scholar for an exhibit that Humanities Nebraska brought to several local museums called Journey Stories back in, 2012, 2013, I think. And so it's one of my talks I do through the Nebraska Humanities Council, Humanities Nebraska Speakers Bureau. We have lots of great programs. I happen to be also the vice chair of the board of Humanities Nebraska, so please utilize this. We're getting a lot of requests because of the sesquicentennial. And also I have my little flag pin on, which is available in the museum store on your way out. You can get one of those. So please take advantage of what Humanities Nebraska has to offer. And we had a little commercial for the Historical Society earlier, but I want to make another one because the price of membership is worth this issue, because two of my pictures I have in my talk today are actually back to back in this issue of Nebraska history. So I hope you all become members of the Historical Society if you're not. So today I want to talk about immigration to Nebraska. Most of us are products of that. We could say just about everybody, including Native Americans, at some point came here from someplace else. And we have a couple of slides here that have some great quotes about what is the land and when people came to the land. Let me see if I can get my slide up here on the screen too, so I don't have to look over my shoulder all the time. Willa Cather, of course, famous Nebraska author who wrote about Nebraska people, and a couple of these quotes are my favorite. I grew up going from Plattsmouth, where I was raised from 9 months old, to my grandparents' house in Scotts Bluff, where my parents both grew up, and so 2 or 3 times a year, every year, we drove all the way from, I say we're a bi-coastal family, actually, in Nebraska, and so the first quote here makes me think of traveling across Nebraska. The main character in My Antonia, Jim Burden, coming from Virginia to Nebraska, says, "I do not remember crossing the Missouri River or anything about the long day's journey through Nebraska. Probably by that time I had crossed so many rivers that I was dull to them. The only thing very noticeable about Nebraska was that it was still all day long Nebraska." And that was for sure when you're a little kid riding in the car all the way across. And speaking of our immigrants and the people who settled here, this other quote is also great, because once Jim actually does get to Black Hawk, right, Red Cloud, he gets on the wagon to go to his grandparents' farm, and he's looking up at the night sky, and he says, "There seemed to be nothing to see, no fences, no creeks, or trees, no hills or fields. There was a road, or if there was a road, I could not make it out in the faint starlight. There was nothing but land, not a country at all, but the material out of which countries are made." So this is the picture that we used on the flyer for today, and this is from the State Historical Society collections. I thought this was really appropriate, again, when John asked me to give this talk, because of course I'm a Volga German, and I'm a 100% Volga German, or German from Russia. And so I've always loved this picture. I use it in a talk that I do on the Germans from Russia in Nebraska. And if you don't know about us, I'll tell you a little bit more about us in a few minutes. But Volga German immigrants arriving in Lincoln on the Burlington Railroad, courtesy of the State Historical Society. Not sure of the date, probably 1880s, but this kind of says it all, right? Our immigrant ancestors, this could almost be any of our folks, Czechs or Danes or whoever they happen to be. And the kid in the middle, the teenager, 12, 14, I don't know how old he is, maybe, just the way he's standing makes me think he's just like, I'm ready to go, right? I'm taking on this new country, sort of. I don't know where Dad is, but lots of women and children, but he's ready to conquer the new world. We also always have inspiration, and I think probably because history is my vocation and my avocation, I'm a genealogist also, as many of you in the room probably are, but who do we credit or maybe blame sometimes for this? And my credit is to my grandmother, my dad's mother. My family kind of skipped a generation. My dad was 44 when I was born, and my mom was 41. I'm the youngest, oops, baby, kind of. My grandma, this is my dad's mom, Katie Benzel Schleicher. She was born in Kolb, Russia, along the Volga. Came to the United States when she was, I don't know if you can still hear me if I move away, because my slides on the screen down here aren't lining up with this, but I'll look up here. Came to the United States in 1906 with her family. She remembered her uncle serving in the Tsar's army in the Russo-Japanese War in 1904. 1910, they finally ended up in Scottsbluff County, Nebraska, where she lived out her life and passed away there in 1986. So I only had her until I was in college, but instead of Disneyland, I went to the Slay's house for 2 weeks in the summertime. So I got to know the history of her family, and she didn't need a software or a computer. All of her genealogy and her husband's genealogy was in her head, so she shared all those stories with me. And so here she is in the middle with her family shortly after they came to the United States in 1916 or 1917. One of her youngest brother in the middle there, Carl, she had a lot of stories about him on the boat, and he was kind of misbehaving and not very good, and he had to go report to some ship's officer because he was being a bad boy. She remembered the first time she ever saw a person of color. She remembered the first time she ever saw a banana. So think about that, coming from Russia to the United States when you're 11 years old. But if we think about going further into the past, where did everybody come who settled in Nebraska? Even our forebears of our Native American population, many of them moved here from other parts of the North American continent up to 10,000 years ago. Settling down, some coming from other parts of what we would know as the United States, coming out to the plains. So if we think about all of the different populations of people that are in Nebraska and still in Nebraska, where did they come from and where did they settle? Our historical tribes here that were in our what becomes Nebraska at settlement time, 1850s, 1860s. I've included a few quotes, which you're all educated. I'll let you read for yourself, but he seemed like a perennial presidential candidate, right? Pat Paulson, a comedian, has a great quote here at the top about immigration policy on the part of the Native Americans. And we're still talking about it, right? Immigration policy today. So thinking again about some of our forebears before we get the rush of settlement, early fur trappers, fur traders, Nebraska, or British and French especially, coming out to this part of the world. And finally, thinking of those people who passed through but went on, right? We're famous for our Oregon Trail and California Trail and Mormon Trail miles, but those people were passing through and going to another place. Of course, the Transcontinental Railroad eventually is built, and we get people passing through as well. I think they were disadvantaged. They should have stopped and stayed because it's a pretty great place. So, and I'm happy that my family came here. I went a number of years ago when I was working for the State Historical Society. Part of my family lived at Sutton on my dad's side of the family, and so I was going to Sutton from Lincoln for a family reunion, and I stopped at a rest area by York there, and the tourism information guy in the rest area place had made a little cardboard, just corrugated cardboard sign with a black marker, and all it said was, "Colorado is closed." So I love that. I always remember that sign. So thinking about our new Nebraska Territory, 1854, we're going to get obviously cut down to size here to what eventually is going to become our state. We can do it without the Dakotas, right, in Montana. We don't need that. We had about 3,000 people in territory days up to statehood. Of course, the Civil War delays our statehood. We maybe would have become a state sooner, had more settlement if it wasn't for the interruption of the war years. But we get 5 years ago already, right? 2012, we have the celebration of 150th anniversary of a number of actions that really made our made settlement possible, or more possible maybe, in economic development for Nebraska. Let me try and scroll down here on my computer slides. See if I can stop having to look up at the big screen. So if we think about these federal acts, and again, if we think about, so I don't lapse into my World Civ lecture that I give to my UNO students, we get the federal government, and of course during the time of the Civil War, when we don't have to deal with those pesky Southerners, right? They're out of Congress, they're in the Confederacy, and so we're able to pass legislation like these four major acts that are passed. The Homestead Act. We're going to supply land. This is Thomas Jefferson's dream, right? We want a bunch of yeoman farmers in this country. We're going to give land away to settlers if they improve it, if they build a house, if they stay there, if they plant crops and improve it in other ways, settle up. Of course, we remember that in Nebraska because of Daniel Freeman, right? Homestead National Monument, Beatrice. We don't like to say the first as historians because we might be proven wrong, but one of the first and probably one of the very first people to file for a homestead under the Homestead Act right here in what would become Nebraska. Secondly, getting people here, right? Getting settlers here, getting supplies here, and sending the commodities, the farm commodities, cattle and crop products that we produce here back to other parts of the country. So the Pacific Railroad Act, right? Very important for building westward from Omaha. Obviously still an economic engine, but I'll use that term as our chancellor at UNMC likes to use that term so much. Union Pacific still headquartered here in Omaha, still an important thing for us, as well as other railroads, the Burlington and others as well. Got to get a plug in for Warren Buffett's Burlington Railroad too. So the Morrill Act also for land grant universities, of course, and many of us at one point in our education or another took advantage of one of those campuses in the University of Nebraska system, which of course is one of those land grant universities. And finally, we don't think about it as much, but also in the same year, we had the passing of the bill to start the Department of Agriculture. So obviously to help farmers, educate farmers, and deal with the farm economy. So railroads, of course, important. Statehood comes, and that's obviously what we're celebrating this year, March 1st, 1867. I try and always tell my colleagues in the library that I work in, and really everybody, we never remember that March 1st is Statehood Day, right? If it wasn't the sesquicentennial year, we just kind of forget, unless we're going to the Statehood Day dinner or something at the Capitol. But I think we need to really encourage people to celebrate that day all the time, not just because it's the 150th anniversary of that this year, but to think about that every day. So we've got some emphasis upon railroads and agriculture. We've got railroad lands available. We don't have substantial immigration till the passage of the Homestead Act, and especially after the end of the Civil War. The huge period of growth is that period between the Civil War and World War I, especially the period of the 1880s. We literally explode in population in the 1880s. We reach 1 million in population by 1890, and the big banner headlines are, how soon will we get to 2 million? Well, here we are in 2017, still haven't quite made it. As of 2015, we have approximately 1.896 million, according to whatever I searched on Google the other day. But that substantial period of settlement is between the Civil War and World War I. So about half the new settlers come directly from foreign countries at that time. We think about the advantages of the United States. We think about what things are attracting our immigrant ancestors to come here. But I also think about, what would make you leave a place where your family lived for hundreds and hundreds of years probably, to go to a place where you probably don't speak the language. Maybe you know some people because maybe you followed some other pioneering immigrants from your town or your area of Bohemia or Russia or the German states or wherever you're coming from. But what would make you pick up? How bad would it have to be to make you pick up and leave? I don't think I could do that. I mean, if I was my 11-year-old grandmother, I'd be pretty scared, right? Even though I'm with my parents, pretty unsure about that. But what's going on back in those German states and other European countries? Because remember, we don't have a unified Germany until the 1870s. So we've got lots of little Bavaria and Prussia and all those little states. Germans, of course, maybe because of that, are one of the largest groups to come to not only the United States, but also Nebraska as well. So in 1872, we have about 50,000 German-born citizens in the state. By 1890, we have 72,000 German-born citizens. By 1900, we've got 20% or 1/5 of the total population of Nebraska are German-born. Another great quote from Willa Cather from an article she wrote for The Nation magazine in 1923, and she includes everybody, right? She talks about everybody who comes to Nebraska. Colonies of European peoples, Slavonic, Germanic, Scandinavian, Latin, spread across our bronze prairies like the daubs of color on a painter's palette. They brought with them something that this neutral world, a new world, needed ever more than the immigrants needed the land. So their culture, their character, and their characteristics. Thinking about what would make you want to leave and not go back, or maybe you're not able to go back. This is actually a translation of my family on the other side. My great-grandmother and grandfather, Wilhelm and Catherine Schleicher, they were newlyweds. They got married in September 1876. They came to the United States. They lived in Ohio for a while, and then they get out to Nebraska by 1878. But this is a translation of their passport. The bearer of this passport, released from being a subject of Russia, and I love this, I'm so proud of this next words, the peasant landholder, yes, I'm just a peasant, peasant landholder from the region of Saratov, Wilhelm Schleicher, age 23, and to be young and pioneering, with his wife Catherine, age 19, is leaving this country forever. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. In witness of which, and for the passage is given, this passport, blah, 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 from the governor at Saratov. Thank you, because we're leaving and we're going to this great place called Nebraska, and we're not going to come back. So here they are in the middle, Wilhelm and Catherine and their children eventually end up, the sugar factory opens in Scottsbluff in 1910. All these people end up in Scottsbluff in 1910. My grandpa at the Arrow, Sam, and just hardy pioneer stock, right? Looking very, very hardy. Uh-oh, my words shifted on my slide. Gosh darn it. So here's another great image from the Historical Society collections, just called Scottsbluff County Town. Circa 1900, Scottsbluff is founded. This is Broadway in Scottsbluff. Pretty nice. No Midwest theater at this time. My dad's side of the family, they come in 1878, originally to Sutton. They lived there for a while. My great-grandmother's parents and some of her siblings were there. In 1900, they moved down to Oklahoma. In 1904, they moved to Loveland, Colorado. And in 1910, to Scottsbluff County. All of these, as my grandmother told me in quotes here, was to work beets, sugar beets. A Nebraska politician, congressman, wisely realized that especially west of the 100th meridian, so the western third of Nebraska and other more arid places in the western part of the United States, 160 acres is not enough to make it, right? We need more than that. We need to irrigate. We need to get irrigation projects in place. So Moses Kincaid, Nebraska congressman, 1904, puts forth an amendment to the Homestead Act to qualify people for 640 acres of public land, specifically applied to 37 counties in the western and northwestern part of Nebraska in the Sandhills, signed into law by Theodore Roosevelt. And on the left here we have, I do have arrows. So this is my grandpa, Sam, who was a Kincaider, and his friend Ed Weatherfield on the left. And when my grandpa died in 1983, the minister at his funeral in Scottsbluff really eulogized him as a pioneer because his family had come there in 1910. And if we think about the town of Gearing is 1887, the town of Scottsbluff is 1900. So here we go from the State Historical Society survey report, reconnaissance survey report of Logan County, but looking at the area in the shaded gray, those counties affected or to which the Kincaid Act applied. So you would be able to get that 640 acres. And the rest of the story, right? I wouldn't be here today. So here are the two I'm not going to focus all on my folks, but my grandparents got married in 1924. I love this picture. So cute. So, of course, we Germans are the best, right, and the most, but we want to think about other people who came as well. Nebraska population in 1900, a little over 1 million. We've got number 1 Germans, number 2 Swedes, 3 Danish, 4 Irish, 5th English, and so on. Number 6 we'll talk about, Russia. So probably predominantly those people are actually Germans from Russia. They are a German ethnic minority who settled in Russia beginning in the 1760s at the invitation of Catherine the Great, and by the 1860s and 70s, they're heading out again. They're heading to Canada and the United States and other places. Great statistics, born at sea, 156. One of my mom's aunts was born at sea. Wouldn't that be terrible, ladies, to be pregnant, let alone have your child on the ship? And 503,000, so half the state's population born of parents who had come from the old country. The other thing I love about Nebraska, when I travel, people always say, "Oh, you're from Nebraska," and I say, "Yeah," and then they say, "Oh, I was there once," and then I stop them. I say, "Let me finish your sentence for you. You drove through on your way to the Grand Canyon, the Rocky Mountains, Disneyland." "Yeah, how'd you know that?" Sorry, drive-through state, right? Fly over or drive-through, maybe, if we're taking a family vacation. But I was going to say, the other thing I like about our state is the smallness of our population and how we get to know people. And we say it only takes 2 degrees of separation, right, to meet everybody in Nebraska. So pleased to have some stats from a book by Dorothy Weir Cree, who is a historian from Hastings, and I happen to be a Dorothy Weir Cree history scholar at Hastings College. So all those good connections. I never got to meet her, but she had passed away before I went to school, but I was able to take advantage of some money that she left for scholarships. So even by 1918, and the State Historical Society is starting to record the information and the history. We don't have very much history right at this time, but we're starting to think about who are these people, right? Who makes up our state? In the Nebraska History and Record of Pioneer Days, right? The predecessor of this thing, Nebraska History, we're thinking about, I love the title too, the sources of Nebraska people. So let's put together the stats. Let's start to study and see who our folks are and where they've come from. In the red box, summary of native and foreign stock in Nebraska. Native white, native parents in Nebraska, so many, I won't give you all the stats, but lots of foreign born, obviously also Indian, Asiatic, as they put it, African or African American, so much a percent. We'll blow up this green box so we can look at those stats a little more closely. Foreign stock, right? It sounds like we're cattle, kind of, right? One friend of mine, I have the charts on my wall in my hallway going upstairs where I have all my family pictures, pedigree chart. And a friend of mine's like, "Oh, you're like a dog in the dog show." I said, "Yeah, it's bloodline, guys, come on." So, but if you think about that foreign stock, right? Germany, the most, as we said, a lot of English and Canadian. I don't know why they say except French Canadian, maybe they don't count. Scandinavia, and so on. But let's look down here, Russia, and then we've got this chiefly Germans coming from the German colonies in Russia. So as we said, the Volga Germans, the Black Sea Germans, or you can call us the Germans from Russia. Not as many French, not as many Italians or Greeks. We'll get Italians in Omaha. We'll get the Greeks thrown out of Omaha at one point, and they move west. But lower numbers there. Another look essentially at the same kind of statistics here from Nebraska Atlas. Whoops, excuse me. So if we think about our sources, Nebraska Atlas of 1964, and again, kind of the same rankings that we saw previously, and a map to go along with it. So it's interesting to see when things were published too, because of course this says U because it's Russia, right? Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So meaning again, those Volga Germans are Germans from Russia. So U, Scottsbluff County, Morrill County, German, Northeast Nebraska, right? Lots of German Roman Catholics. Hall and Adams County, German, all down through here the most. But we've got others, but we've got this predominance of Germans and Germans from Russia. So, where did we come from and where did we land? Germans again, high numbers in Hall County, Grand Island, Kearney County, Lancaster, Otos, Saline, and Seward. Germans from Russia, as we said, Volga Germans or Russian Germans. Adams County, Hastings, Clay County, and Sutton. Sutton was kind of a dropping off point on the Burlington Railroad for us. It was kind of a distribution center. A lot of people knew people who came there and went there, and then they moved on to other places, either to the high plains of Colorado and Wyoming, to the Dakotas, up to other parts of Nebraska, etc. Lancaster County, the South Bottoms and North Bottoms, of course, here in Lincoln, heavily Germans from Russia. O Street is the border, never the twain shall meet, North and South Bottoms, because it was two different villages. One side was Lutheran, one side was Calvinist, Reformed, or Congregational, so you didn't date a girl. The old guys told me, the old Germans from Russia and Lincoln, from the other side of O Street. It was not allowed. And then Red Willow County, McCook, and of course Scottsbluff County also for Germans from Russia. We have the highest number of Czechs per capita, I believe. I've heard that statistic before. I was privileged to know at Hastings College, my friend Jen Struess was the South Central Nebraska Czech queen when we were in college from the Hastings Czechs. So lots of Czechs, Bohemians in many different counties, many different locales, and also South Omaha. I remember growing up as a kid in Plattsmouth, driving into Omaha on 13th Street or 24th Street, and we'd see all the Czech and Polish and all the Eastern European immigrant neighborhood right at that time. South Omaha, formerly a separate municipality, where the streets were just numbers and letters, so the dumb immigrants could remember them, right? No names of trees or presidents or anything like that. That's what they said. I'm not making that up. Don't mean to be mean to more. And now, of course, we have the cross-culturalness of the former Polish home is now El Museo Latino. So I love that. I love that sort of thing. Swedes in Kearney County and Polk County, and some Danes scattered around Hamilton, Howard, and Washington County. Here's our Danish settlements, 1910. And then a few other scattered, right? A few other scattered groups. Italians, Douglas County, especially South Omaha. Greeks, some in Lancaster County, and later further west also. Lots of Irish in Boone County, Douglas County, Greeley, and Holt. Greeley, the town of Greeley has the, I believe it's called the Halfway to St. Patrick's Day. In September, they have a big Irish festival, which I've always wanted to go to, but I never have gotten there yet. The Dutch, here in Lancaster County, right, the town of Holland. My favorite sign, driving south of Lincoln Highway 77. Panama and Holland are both that way, right? The Polish, especially in Omaha, but in some of the Sandhills counties, and some Welsh. And the Welsh have really done a lot to preserve their history and heritage in Gage County. They have a pretty active Welsh Heritage Society. I'll let you read the quotes for yourselves again, because you're all very well educated. African Americans scattered around, but Adams County, Cherry County, Dawes County, especially Douglas County, Hall and Lancaster, Sarpy, and Wheeler. I was intrigued to find when I took my dad to his 60th high school class reunion, Scottsbluff High class of 1939, so in 1999, there was an African American girl in his class, which really surprised me. Kind of the one and only, but it was kind of amazing to me. And Mexican Americans historically, especially Scottsbluff County and Lincoln County. So we think about distinct city neighborhoods also. Little Italy in Omaha, Little Bohemia, historic Jewish North 24th Street, North Omaha being the African American concentration, South Omaha, now newly Hispanic from the historically Czech and Polish neighborhoods. We mentioned the north and south bottoms in Lincoln, and in Hastings, the southwest side. Hastings is bisected by the Union Pacific and the Burlington. Southwest side is the Germans from Russia area. We get this lingering heritage, right? We hold on to the culture of our forebears through newspapers, native language newspapers, which are published for a long time, German newspapers in several cities, Czech papers in Omaha and Wilbur. Lots of bilingual speakers, in some cases still around, perpetuated by maybe church services, or still teaching that language at home in more isolated places, maybe especially out on the ranch or the farm somewhere. Now this, I'm dating myself here. So this young woman who I said was 35, this was probably 15 or 20 years ago that she was 35, because she's more like my age, closer to my age. But I remember meeting her, and still from growing up in the hills, right, somewhere around Clarkson out on the farm, had a very heavy accent, still had a very heavy Czech accent. So someone probably born in the 1960s, still speaking with a very heavy Czech accent from her parents and grandparents. One of the great stories that I was told, I was on the board of the Germans from Russia Society here in Lincoln, but hearing our World War II veterans, many of whom are passed away now, the old German-Russian guys at headquarters, as we call it, on D Street of the Germans from Russia Society, they say, oh, we went to Germany to fight in World War II, and as they would put it, we talked German to those Nazi soldiers, and they looked at us funny. Well, it was old-style German. It was 200 years old, because their families left Germany, the German states, in the 1760s. So the Nazi soldiers probably like, we can't understand half the things you're saying. So much so that at World War I, we want to hold on to language, and especially in parochial schools, church schools, we're teaching German and other native languages, but even teaching of foreign languages in schools overall, we get a landmark Supreme Court case. In World War I, obviously very anti-German sensibilities especially, but so many Germans. It seems like it doesn't make sense, because we have a predominantly German population, but then our politicians say, no, we're going to outlaw teaching of foreign languages, which German is one of the major ones that we teach, but we're going to regulate the teaching of foreign languages. And eventually this goes through the courts, Meyer versus Nebraska, 1923 decision that we could not restrict teaching and speaking of foreign languages, because that's freedom of speech too. It doesn't matter if we speak English or Spanish or German or whatever language it is, that's still guaranteed to us under the Constitution. Fraternal organizations, and I'll say heritage or history and genealogical organizations, obviously. The Czech Sokol, very famous, and the lodges. The German Turnverein in Grand Island. The Germans from Russia Welfare Society, that was North Bottoms, where that is, on the north side of O Street. Many sort of insurance, beneficiary societies help you out if something bad happens. So the Union of Romanian Beneficial Society, isn't that a great name? We didn't have too many Romanians, so I guess they stuck together in Omaha. Grand Island, the Platt Deutsch Society, which just 5 or 10 years ago allowed women to even join the organization. And finally in Omaha, unfortunately, they just had a fire a few months ago, but the Sons of Italy, South 10th Street in Omaha, if you've never been there, if you can go to Omaha on a Thursday during the school year, and they haven't reopened yet, probably in the fall, they have a pasta lunch every Thursday. The men only let the women help starting to cook a few years ago. The men did it, right? It was the Sons of Italy. They make their own pasta, they make their own sausage, meatballs, sauce. It's great. One day, Senator Nelson was setting the table for us. He had his apron on, was putting the silverware and everything down. So go there at election time, because every politician will be at the door shaking your hand and giving you a sticker. So I had an education professor at Hastings College who liked to talk about this a lot. She talked about the idea of, are we a melting pot, or are we more like a stew pot, or maybe like a tossed salad, right? Because some of us hold on to some of the characteristics that we have from our ancestors. I worked as a volunteer with the exhibits and the artifacts at the Germans from Russia Society when I lived in Lincoln, and the coolest thing I found was this Rudge and Gunzel department store guide to citizenship, printed in German. So, right, we want you to assimilate, we want you to become an American citizen. Eventually, we want you to probably speak English, but maybe keep your German. And of course, oh yeah, we want you to shop at Rudge and Gunzel, right? So we'll give you this promotional thing with the ad on the back, right? Come and spend your money here. Once you've lived the American dream, we want you to shop in our store. As I said earlier, my grandmother taught me my heritage. You know, I didn't realize it until I was older, but every time we had a meal, Komm Herr Jesu, right? Come Lord Jesus. That was what they said in German. That's what we said in English for our grace. My grandma, I'll get verklempt here thinking about this, but I'm glad I didn't get to go to Disneyland. I'm glad I had to go to Gearing to my grandma's house as a kid. So when they couldn't drive anymore and they were still living in their house, she would read aloud in the morning and the evening a chapter from the Bible in German and in English. My grandpa didn't really understand the German that much either, so I wasn't the only one. But then she would usually sing a hymn in German, so it's just a great memory that I have and picture that I have. And sitting in her little gold chair that you saw her in earlier. Other great stories, like our Germans from Russia guys in World War II talking to the Nazis. World War I, my mom's side of the family was from Hastings, but there's this great story in a book called Children of the Volga by George Bruntz about an older lady in Hastings. She goes to shop in the store downtown. We've got the anti-German feeling. She doesn't speak much English or very little English. The storekeeper doesn't want to wait on her because she's a German. And so she, through her friend, translates for her to says to the storekeeper, "Sir, how many sons do you have fighting the Kaiser in Germany?" And he says, "Oh, I don't have any sons." "Well, I have 3 sons," she says, "fighting against the Kaiser in the American army in Germany." So there, ha, you American Yankee. And again, as we said, German church services, but other, church services in native language as well up through the 20th century. So we're holding on to a lot of that heritage. So thinking about salad bowl, right? Looking at percentages of people. Here in Lincoln in 1940, 40% of the population are Germans from Russia. They started coming in the 1870s up until World War I time period. Don't call me Russian. That's like calling me a Polak, or a bohunk or something, that's derogatory. And people were always confused, right? These people are telling their story. How you're German, but you came from Russia. How are you? I don't get it, right? So we're an ethnic minority in the Russian Empire for about 100 years, and then we come to the United States. Even today in Scottsbluff County, probably 50 to 60% of the population are Germans from Russia. Along with, interestingly, the mix there, Mexican Americans who had come from the 19-teens and 1920s. Germans from Russia worked as migrant laborers in the beet fields at first before we started buying the farms and settling there. We were replaced as those migrant workers by Mexican Americans who came early, again, from the 19-teens and 1920s. And quite a Japanese American community in Scottsbluff as well. And again, all of them involved in the sugar beet industry. When I lived in Lincoln back in the 90s, good friend of mine, he had grown up, was born and grew up in Scottsbluff until he was about 10 or so and moved to Kearney, but his last name was Benavidez, right? Mexican American. So we went to visit both of his elderly grandmothers in Scottsbluff. My grandparents had already passed away, but Grandma Benavidez and Grandma Contreras in Scottsbluff. Grandma Benavidez liked to make her own version of runzas. And Grandma Contreras liked to plant hot Japanese peppers in her garden. So there you go, right? Cross-cultural effect. And again, these two ladies came probably in the 20s as kids, 1920s, from Mexico, these two grandmas. So we won't even get into current, immigration debate and policy. 1980 census, a little over 700,000 Nebraskans said they had some German ancestry. 300,000, excuse me, of Irish, and so on. 292,000 English. So kind of those same rankings that we see historically are still showing through today. And just to give you a little bit of a microcosm right here in the big city, my uncle who lived in Tarrytown between Scottsbluff and Gearing liked to say, "How are things back east?" And be like, "We don't live in Boston or New York City, you know. We don't even live in Chicago. We live by Omaha." And then he'd say to my dad, "How are things in Omaha? You know, it's 20 miles away from Plattsmouth." So he'd say, "I don't know. I haven't been up there for a few weeks." So it's closer now. It seems closer now today with the freeway, and we do get that. You know, Omaha is the big decadent city of the East, right? For us, for Nebraskans, for a small town and Westerners especially. And here's the reason why, right? Omaha much more blue collar, Lincoln much more white collar with government and insurance and lawyers and all of that. Omaha much more of an ethnic mix historically and today as well. So just looking at the numbers here from the 2000 census. This is a great map that I found online. So from the 2000 census, I guess I need to get my 2010 figures now since we're already in 2017. But the lighter blue color is German ancestry. So if you look over here, hey, wow, that's pretty dang blue out there, except for the reservation, right, for Native Americans up here in the Northeast. So by far, the Germans predominate. And I will stop there. We're about a quarter till, yes, this is me, on my grandma and grandpa's front porch. I love this quote from my Angelou in conclusion here. "The ache for home lives in all of us, the safe place where we can go as we are and not be questioned," right? We're just whoever we are. So I've lived all my life in Nebraska, and that's great. I think that's wonderful. Some friends of mine and colleagues who moved here from other states say, "Oh, well, you should move somewhere for a while, and then you'll want to come home again," right? I'm like, no, I don't ever want to leave. I don't want to leave. Oh, I'm getting excited about this because I love it, right? So I'm very happy to have shared this with you today, and I would really be happy to take some questions if anybody has questions. If I can try to answer. Yes?
Why did the Kincaid Act not cover all of Nebraska?
It applied especially to, why did the Kincaid Act not cover all of Nebraska was the question. I'm sorry, we'll repeat our question. It applied especially to more arid parts of the state. So the 100th meridian and west is the high plains, so the shorter grass prairie. You don't get as much rain, and so that was the reason. You couldn't survive on 160 acres in that more arid west. So that's the reason, not just Nebraska counties, but it applied in other states as well. But that was the reason why they gave you more land, because you probably needed to irrigate, and you couldn't, you had to plant timber, you had to do all kinds of other things that above and beyond what the Homestead Act asked you to do. Yes?
I was reading at the bottom, and I didn't get it finished. It said, "These people did not come through the turnstiles of Ellis Island."
Oh, I'm
and
not sure.
then, so did they just...
One of the quotes, I don't remember which one it is, but there were other, yeah, that's a good point. So where did people come in? Did they not only come in through Ellis Island? My grandma talked about, so in 1906, and maybe she didn't remember correctly as a kid, or maybe she heard other things, she would have come through Ellis Island. But she always said that her family came through Castle Garden, which was the predecessor place to Ellis Island. So I don't know if they were still running that too for a while when Ellis Island first opened. Galveston was a big point of entry. Part of my family on my dad's side were illegal immigrants, essentially, because they came through Canada and snuck in and came down to Sutton, Nebraska through the Dakotas. So who knows what skeletons we have in our closets. Yes?
I saw in 1900 federal census tabulation, you have Germans from Russia and then Russians. So were there really in code Russians coming from Russia?
Good question. So in the 1900 statistics, it said Germans from Russia and Russians. There were a few ethnic Russians, very few, not very many who came to Nebraska, but some.
And would you have any speculation why did they come from military service again, or what?
Probably, yeah. So a lot of us, again, we have a history of draft dodgers, right, in our families, right? Why do we want to get out? Whether you're Czech or German or wherever you're from. In Russia, Catherine the Great issued her proclamation in the 1763 and said, I call it a glorified Homestead Act. She said, free land, freedom from taxes for 30 years, local self-government, you can keep your language, you can keep your religion, as long as you don't proselytize among the Russian Orthodox peasants. And this is forever. She granted this is forever, right? She's the autocratic ruler. She makes the rules. This lasts forever. Well, forever only lasted until the 1872, because Alexander II freed the Russian serfs, and he instituted, and no military service, right, ever for these German immigrants. Alexander II instituted compulsory military service. So that's another reason. There were growing land shortages, but the military service that many monarchs, European monarchs, required was one reason. And so that may have been a reason for Russians also to leave.
The other question I was going to have was, I thought a lot of Norwegians came as well.
Not as many as Swedish and Danish in Nebraska, as far as I know. Yeah, not in Nebraska so much. Chicago and other places, there's a lot of Norwegian population. But
And would this Germans from Russia, how much of them is Mennonites?
right, that's a good question also. So among the Germans from Russia, to repeat the question again, a number of Mennonites. An interesting thing that Catherine the Great learned, because her father worked for Frederick the Great in Prussia, right? All those German states suffering the wars of the Reformation. So what Catherine the Great, her ministers also did in those German settlements in Russia, everybody could come strictly, and of course we see this throughout history everywhere, anti-Semitism, no Jews, but anybody else could come to settle in Russia. Lots of Germans answered the call because they lived in, the central German states, Hesse and other places that growing land shortages, history of wars of those little states and with France and other places. But Catherine's minister said, we don't want to have fights among the Christians, right, of whatever stripe they are. So all of these little villages that they established, one town was all Mennonite, this village is all Catholic, this village is all Lutheran, this village is all Calvinist Reformed. So there were lots of Mennonites, but there were Lutherans and others, but we're going to separate them by their settlements. We're going to separate by religion so they don't fight with each other. Yes, sir, in the back.
I used to travel in the sandhills quite a bit and talk to the ranchers, and a lot of them have an English background. Very proud of it.
Right.
And I noticed that the numbers
Not huge, but yeah, there's in certain places there are. Yeah. Yes, sir.
There was this huge population explosion in the 1880s, you said.
Right.
And I'm wondering how people in the old country, various ethnic groups, came in the media of that day to know about the opportunities to cross the pond and come
Right.
here.
I didn't talk about that. I didn't cover that, but there's some great things that here at the Historical Society has. We had promotion by the railroads to sell their lands, Burlington Northern and Union Pacific. They translated promotional flyers essentially into Czech and German and Polish and sent them across to Europe. The Nebraska, I would call it economic development of its time, right? 1880s, sent out promotional and sometimes maybe, what do I want to say, Pollyannish, right? It's a great place and there's lots of rain and all this really, really good stuff that maybe wasn't really quite, 100% true, but they sent out information in other languages as well to promote foreign immigration to Nebraska.
Did the Great World's Fairs, for example, in Paris in 1889, I think it was, did those play a role in disseminating information and allowing people to know about opportunities in other places in the world?
Good question. Did the World's Fairs in places like Paris and other European countries, did they play a role in promoting? I think in general, I don't know specifically if they, because every country was invited to have a booth or have a hall or building. So I'm sure the United States, is promoting industry and agriculture and everything we do, but I don't know specifically if any, government department or anybody said, come on out because we have Homestead Act land and come settle here. I don't know if that was necessarily done or not. I'm just don't know for sure about that. Good question. That's a good question, though. Something to look up. Yes, sir.
Being of Irish descent, I'm surprised that the Irish, maybe up until 1880, had more of a presence here than they did afterwards. Is that correct? I mean, because of railroad development and after the Civil War.
Right. A lot of Irish immigrants early on, especially for building of the railroad, and maybe Civil War veterans also coming here. I think the thing is they just kind of get flooded out by the Scandinavians and the German. We don't think about them as much because we get, but the thing about the Irish, though, too, they're really good about preserving their heritage. I mean, we all know about O'Neill, Nebraska. We've got big Irish things in Omaha all the time, and those people are really, they're not the biggest in numbers, but they're good at promoting themselves, right? Letting people know they're still around. That big shamrock in front of Barrett's on Leavenworth Street in Omaha, right? Our neighborhood bar for UNMC. No, I didn't say that. Any other questions I could try and answer? Yes, ma'am.
Way back to the very beginning, we talked about never going back, but we didn't really quite cover what was the main reason that they left, that they never ever wanted to come back?
Good question. Well, in the case of my great-grandparents, their passport said that, right? They're leaving this country for, I don't know if there was a policy that you could come back, but, and again, if you think about, the question again was, why wouldn't you go back? Why would you be disappointed? Or, we think about all the advantages of the U.S., the freedoms of our Constitution and our government, democracy in a republic, the opportunities for agriculture or for working in industry or just living that American dream, right? Get rich, be successful. But also to turn that around again and think about, what is so bad? Military conscription, maybe some land shortages. The Volga Germans are starting to have land shortages for multiple sons, right? Some bad crop years. What would make you want to get out? What would make you want to leave and come and stay permanently? Which it's hard for me to imagine that. Again, I'm a person who lives 20 miles from where I grew up, so I sit pretty close to home. But to make things bad enough, and think about, think about current immigrants from wherever. Think about how bad, I think one of my quotes was Tony Blair said, I judge a country by how many people want in, not how many people are trying to get out, right, because of the advantages. But think about how bad would it have to be for you, to leave, and for your children or maybe your future children or something. Yes, sir.
I'm sure financially it was a one-way trip as well.
Right, financially it was probably a one-way trip was the question. I'm sure that's the case. So we're running out of time. I can take some more questions in a second here, but I'd like to thank you all for coming today. We're running out of TV time, but I'm happy to answer more questions. So I invite you all back. Next month's talk will feature some distinct stories of families from different places who immigrated to Nebraska. So thank you very much for coming today.